Bibles. Our story begins with a very famous person in Jerusalem society. I say famous, he might be more infamous than famous. He might be more notorious than just popular. The point is, everybody knew this guy that we're going to read about in and around Jerusalem. In chapter 9, we find out where Jesus is at. Chapter 8, verse 59 says, "So they picked up stones to throw at him." This is when Jesus, remember, we were in chapter 8 for like 6 weeks. It was a pretty packed chapter. This was when the woman caught in adultery was brought to him, and they were going to stone her. And then he says, "I am God," by calling himself I am. Then they're going to stone him. And he was around the temple when that happened. So that's where it left off. It said they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So I never really put that together. When they were going to do this, he was in the temple. All this was going on inside the courtyard area of the temple. The most religious place on planet Earth is where some of these things took place. Then we enter chapter 9. As he passed by, that means right outside the temple. Where's the temple? In Jerusalem. That's how I know we're in Jerusalem. I'm a C guy. Remember that from high school? I got to have it said flat out for me to really get this. So as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And then the disciples asked, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Born blind from birth. I've really enjoyed Northern California here because I was born in Southern California, but I somehow missed the whole other half of the state. I apologize for that, my bad. But when I was growing up there, I just didn't come up here that much. And there's beautiful things. I did come up for Tahoe as a skier. It was required, and I love it. But I didn't really know how much beauty and how much there was to see here. And really seeing some of the sites. I still haven't been to everything. For example, I haven't been to San Jose, and some of you are like, "Well, that's not pretty, Pastor Rob. You can just skip that." I want to go there because my dad used to play this song when I was growing up. "Do you know the way to San Jose?" Remember that? Do you know the way to San Jose? I don't, as it turns out. If I was driving through San Jose, which we've never been in the city, Michelle and I, and we got to see it, reminisce about the song and all. I'm driving down maybe Main Street, assuming they have a Main Street in San Jose. Let me just paint a scenario. Let's say that I saw a homeless guy, not uncommon in California. But let's say I see a one-armed homeless man at a traffic light. I wouldn't say, now listen carefully to this. I would not say, as I drove by, I saw a one-armed vet who was injured in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. I wouldn't say that. And you're probably realizing for obvious reasons why I wouldn't say that. And my companions, if Michelle's with me and, some of you come on a tour of San Jose, which is number one on your bucket list, I'm pretty sure. And we're traveling through that. You would not respond and go, "Who messed up, Preacher Rob? This man or his unit in Vietnam that he has sustained these injuries." Why wouldn't you say that? Because you have no idea who that guy is. He's not famous. You've never seen him before. I have no idea who he is. Michelle has no idea who he is. Never seen him, don't know him. However, people knew when they walked by, and Jesus comes out of a pretty fretful thing going on. They're trying to take his life and stone him in the temple, and he's passing by. I don't think he's casually strolling by. I really don't. I think he's moving pretty quickly. Remember, there's a mob after him, and yet he sees this blind guy, and apparently everybody knows who he is. You don't typically see a blind guy and go, "That blind guy, he strikes me as one who's been blind from birth." You wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know if it's an injury or if he was born that way just by seeing him. You would know that by reputation only. So that's revealed. We know where this happened. We know that he was famous because he'd been there basically most of his adult life begging. But something else is revealed here, and that's what this passage is really about. And it's not a good thing. It's kind of a sad commentary on that culture and a culture a couple thousand years before that culture and our culture today. It's something that's still prevalent. It's very common even in churches today. Out with it, Pastor Rob. What are you talking about? I'm talking about their worldview when it comes to pain and suffering. The question I had you guys all ask. I'm talking about where they think it comes from. Did you know it matters? It matters where you think it came from as to how you'll react to it. It really does. And these people have clearly bought into what I call the JFK conspiracy. Pastor Rob, you might call it the JFK conspiracy, but you know you didn't make that up, right? I mean, there's a real JFK. Yeah, I know, the grassy knoll and all that one. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a different grassy knoll, a couple thousand years before Jesus was walking by this blind man, and something I refer to as Job's friends killer conspiracy. What are the initials? JFK. The JFK conspiracy. So let me paint it for you. You see, after Job had been, just to kind of give you the story, after he had been robbed of all his wealth, his camels, his sheep, his money, after his entire family except for his wife was killed in tornado, earthquake, he'd lost all 10 kids. After he's disease-stricken, and there's boils and disfiguring disease, his friends traveled from afar to comfort and sit with him. And I want you to think about what they did. Because these friends of Job's, and you're like, aren't we in John 9, Pastor Rob? Where are you going with this? Hang with me. They get a bum rap. They always get it. I've heard preachers talk about what lousy friends they are. Some of it's deserved. It really is. But not all. For instance, let me just read. You make the choice. Job 2, 11 to 13. Now, Job had 3 friends. Eliphaz the Temanite, I don't think he was a termite. He was the Temanite. Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamanite. When these friends heard about Job's troubles, they agreed to meet and visit with him. And they had to travel from afar. They wanted to show their concern and to comfort him. They saw Job from far away, but he looked so different they almost didn't recognize him. Now this is, I believe, the New Living Translation. I'm trying to make sure you don't miss a thing here. Listen, they began to cry loudly, and they tore their robes and put dirt on their heads to show how sad they were about their friend Job. Then they sat on the ground, that's that grassy knoll I'm talking about, with Job for 7 days and 7 nights. And no one said a word to him because they saw how much he was suffering. Remember, from far away, they didn't even recognize him because he was so disfigured. Now, I don't know if I have friends like this. I've got some pretty good friends. I got some best friends for 35 years, but I don't know if I have friends like, I doubt you have friends like this. And if you want to argue, let me just go back over some of what we just read. They sat with him for 7 days, 7 nights, and didn't say a word. I've never had a friend. I had a friend when I went through something very painful. We don't have time to get into that. When I was in Dallas, Texas. And I remember he let me stay at his house, him and his wife, and they really ministered to me. But I will never forget this. He's one of my best friends, Rusty Hayes, till this day, because they sat with me. And they didn't offer a lot of explanation for the pain and suffering. They cried with me, they hugged me, and they just kind of were silent. But the best friend, maybe one of the best friends I've ever had, definitely wasn't silent for 7 days. 7 nights. Our culture, just to contrast it, they might observe a moment of silence when something serious happens. You with me? 7 days, 7 nights. Different cultures. Different outlooks. I'm going to share something here that probably goes against every single pastor you've ever heard teach on Job. At least everyone that I've ever heard. They teach that Job's friends were not very good guys. They attacked Job's character. They blew off his innocence. They argued with his defense of that he was innocent. They insinuated that he was arrogant. They called him a liar. I mean, it's a good case. did they get to this point? From traveling from afar, from crying with him and hugging him and being there and silent and empathizing, to calling him a liar. An all-out rebel, a sinner. Those things are, partially true, those indictments about those friends. They're partially true. And I say partially, though, because it's not really that I differ from most pastors. It's their final conclusion of the friends. Because I think I've already made a case, even with the short thing. I'm going to make an even better case that these were high-quality friends. They are not low-quality friends. There's something else in play here going on that has more power often over us than we give it credit for. It's not a good thing. It's in play in John 9, it's in play in Job, and it's in play in Northern California every day. Get to it, Pastor Rob. I will. Just give me more time to build this up. No, I believe their worldview led them, not the truth. I think their worldview led these friends to change, not the truth of what was actually happening in Job's life. So most pastors usually conclude that these may have appeared to have been good friends, but they were really revealing their true colors. They're kind of bad guys. Again, no, they weren't. They were, in fact, among the very best I've seen in recorded history. That's how dramatically opposed I am to that take on them. Consider the following. Okay, they traveled from afar. How do we know it was far? Because Job owned thousands and thousands of acres, and they didn't have cars. They weren't jumping in their Tesla and going 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. I mean, this took them a long time. They were rich people. They owned a lot. So it could have taken them days just to get there. Probably the closest. They comforted him, and that probably encompassed a myriad of things, right? Hugging him, crying with him. They tried to help Job undoubtedly with what was left of his estate, and comforting his wife, probably trying to take care of things, maybe using some of their money to fill in the gaps because he'd been robbed so bad. They empathized to the tune, as I mentioned earlier, of 7 days of silence, and not trying to offer anything. Like, well, I know why this happened. You notice they didn't offer any of that know-it-all stuff for 7 days. That right there puts them in a category of friendship that most of us are not even aware of. Most religious leaders today will start offering why something happened in 5 minutes. When they go visit a grieving family, all right, I know what this is all about. Seen this before. Here's what you're up against. That's why I had you all break into groups and say, where do you think pain and suffering comes from? To see if it came out that we think on this a little wrongly. We don't have it right. No, these weren't low-quality friends with a high-quality philosophy of life. That's wrong. Instead, they were high-quality friends who were informed by a low-quality worldview. Let me say that again. These are high-quality friends who were led and informed by a low-quality worldview, just like we are today. And it's a cruel worldview at that. See, Job's friends were expressing all their cruel things like, you're a liar, you're a sinner, quit hiding stuff, it's you. All this happened because you're not being honest. They didn't say that behind his back, they said it to his face. I mean, they're putting him down right there. Now, when we go to John 9, they're not saying all this stuff. Hey, who sinned? Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents? He's blind. He's not deaf. He can hear everything they're saying. And how long do you think he's been hearing this stuff? 20 years maybe? I just told you he's famous. Everybody knows him there. And he's been hearing, we don't know what he did, but everybody knows he did something. There's a worldview there. There's a worldview being put on display, and yet I don't think anybody there, or in Job's day, or in our day mostly, is conscious of it. But this is how powerful and cruel the JFK conspiracy is in people's lives. This is how naive the whole idea of, well, let me just come out with it. We have a word for it. I call it the JFK conspiracy, but I don't think that's going to gain traction. It's in competition with the real JFK thing. So you know what? It's a one-word thing. You've heard it. You've probably used it. Karma. It's karma. They're literally buying into the Indian Hindu version of karma. as an answer for pain and suffering. And when we see a situation and we believe in karma, where we think there needs to be karma, in other words, if somebody did something and we know they did something bad, they're like, well, karma's going to get you, right? Because what does karma say? Karma says what goes around comes around. That's karma. But that's what the disciples believed. And that's what the religious leaders believed. What religious leaders? The ones, some of them that had the Pentateuch memorized. The ones, some of them who had the Torah memorized, which includes Job. So if they knew Job, which completely refutes karma, how did they default to karma? Well, that's how powerful that worldview is on pain and suffering. It makes a difference, and Jesus is going to debunk all of that in this one chapter. Gang, that's why there's 41 verses committed to this healing of a blind man. Did you know Jesus healed more blind people as a miracle than any other miracle he did? When he went to towns and stuff, the most recorded type of miracle he does is to give sight to the blind. However, this is the only one ever recorded, Old Testament or New, born blind. And that's huge, as hopefully you're already seeing. So we adhere to this karma thing very easily if we're adherents to the JFK conspiracy theory of life. Okay, P-Row, I see the cruelty and I agree. But why did you say it's all so stupid or naive? Well, I don't think I said stupid. You did. I'll tell you in a few seconds. But before I add stupid to naive, which is kind of cruel, I get it, let me just unpack the naivety part of it. And if some of you are thinking, Pastor Rob, you better be very careful because we're talking about the disciples here. And those are, upon this rock I will build my church. Yes, there's Peter. He's a well-known, important disciple. But I think we all realize he had some flaws, right? He had a little bit of foot and mouth disease. And here I'm just telling you, they have not yet learned the heart of God on pain and suffering. They don't get it. Even though they should have come into their lives and their teaching getting it because of the book of Job alone. But they don't. Once they do, the cruelty and stupidity that they're showing, here's the good news. It'll be gone. It'll be gone. Now, why did I say naive and stupid about their behavior? Well, let me say it again, and we'll just let 10 seconds of awkward silence go by before I answer, because I want to see if you can catch it. I say they were being naive and outright stupid. And I'm going to give you the text, and I'm going to let awkward silence where I don't speak, and it's going to get uncomfortable, which I love, but you guys may not like that. Here it comes. Verse 2. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Who sinned? His parents or him that he was born blind? How could it be him? He was born blind. They're outright being foolish. Not just naive, but outright stupid on this. They know it couldn't have been him. We don't really, there's the whole concept of original sin, and I'm not talking about that. But basically, he's not born yet, so it couldn't have been him. And yet, everybody in that crowd was offering this answer to pain and suffering that's not even an option. I could see this theory finding a little footing if he was made blind when he was maybe 20, right? Or even 15, or even 12 for that matter. But born blind, it's off the table. So again, what would cause them to say something so ridiculous? Their worldview. Their worldview on pain and suffering. It's got a hold of them. And it's got a hold of some of us. Back to Job's friends one more time to see them do the same thing. After 7 days of silence, remember Job's friends? When they finally spoke for the first time, led off by Eliphaz, this much is revealed. And by the way, you might have guessed I have a name for this. I call it the Eliphaz fallacy. Job 4, 7 through 8. This is Eliphaz speaking. Remember that he's talking to Job. They have just opened their mouth after 7 days, and here's what he says. Remember, Job, that the innocent will not die. Honest people will never be destroyed. I have noticed that people who plow evil and plant trouble harvest it. Question, do the innocent ever die? Yeah, all the time. Far too often. This is ridiculous what he's saying. How about honest people? Ever destroyed? Sure, far too much. All the time. So why would Eliphaz, who spent 7 days in silence, caring for him, crying for him, weeping for him, probably dressing his wounds, loving his friend, when he finally opens his wise mouth, why would his first statements be this disingenuous? And I'm being generous. Why would he outright lie? Because of the Eliphaz fallacy. By the way, this is a real fallacy. It has a real name. It's called the false cause fallacy. It's when we assume when the effect is suffering, the cause has to be sin. The false cause fallacy. Let me say it again. They were assuming when I'm observing suffering, their theory was somebody sinned somewhere for that to happen. That's the effect, suffering, sin is the cause. Some of you probably offered that when you were giving different, and you're right, but that's only one. However, in their worldview, it was the only one. The entire book of Job debunks this wrong thinking about God. But how did it get so powerful? Well, maybe you don't know this, but Hinduism and some of these other world religions, they're as old as Christianity. Some of them go way back. Did you know that? And in Hinduism and in India, this whole idea of karma started. I mean, back in the time when Moses is walking the earth, they're developing a lot of the Hindu beliefs. And this idea of karma, what goes around comes around, was so honored and prevalent in Hinduism that they thought if there's a group of people or an individual or a group that are suffering, that's the will of the gods, plural. And in fact, you don't mess with it. In fact, if you get involved and you try to alter that, you'll be guilty of something, and in reincarnation, you'll come back as, I don't know, a grasshopper or something because you messed up. All right? That's karma. However, it's not real. It's a pagan philosophy about pain and suffering that the disciples and Job's friends and many of us and our whole culture buys into. Pastor Rob, I'm starting to see that. Thank you. But I don't really see what difference it makes. What potato. I think suffering comes from this. You think it comes from that. Oh, it makes a huge difference. But how did Job's friends and the disciples who've been walking with Jesus like a year and a half now, how did they fall for this? Well, it's because they are putting, like we do, their version of fairness and justice on God instead of accepting a just and holy God exactly as he is. When God explains himself in the Torah and the Pentateuch and the New Testament, says, here's how I am, we need to follow him as he is and not rebrand him. And dress him up and then bring him back out and say, you like him better now? And who can't see our culture doing that with Jesus right now? Including churches, including pastors. Trying to represent God and his ways in a way that'll fill the church pews a little bit better. They think God ought to make you feel a certain way. They think God ought to judge people a certain way. What way? A way I'm comfortable with. Not necessarily the way God really is, but a way that makes me feel good about God. We probably don't recognize it again as the JFK conspiracy. So I'm going to remind you again of what it was. Remember? Karma. What goes around comes around. So the disciples are asking, who sinned? Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents? What are they saying? Rabbi, is it time for karma in this man's life? I mean, are their parents finally going to get what's coming to them? Or is this because of what his parents did that nobody knows about? This is payback for that. That doesn't even make sense. But that's what they're asking without knowing they're asking it. However, just as with Job, there's far more going on here. And in the entire chapter of chapter 9 of John, then, and I don't mean to trivialize it, but then just one man's pain and suffering. I think I said it before, but there are very, very few miracles, if any, that have this many verses, this much theological real estate dedicated to one miracle. 41 verses about healing a blind guy. Why, Pastor Rob? Because it's not about healing a blind guy. It's about a worldview that can take a whole church, a whole nation, Christianity off course if you don't get it right. It's much more than that. So, this pain this guy had, it starts out like this. It's number 1 in your notes. Pastor Rob, we are 25 minutes into this thing and you're on number 1? Yeah, but the next 3 go fast. So here's point 1. Pain with a purpose. There's a pain and a suffering that means more than just the pain and suffering. God certainly had a purpose, and we know this in hindsight with Job. We know this as we read about the blind man in John 9, but they didn't know it. Pain with a purpose. It was not that this man sinned, Jesus said, or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. There's your purpose. In the case of Job, that people for all time could look at the life of Job and then look at their own pain and suffering and realize there's a spiritual realm, and you pull back the curtain, and if we display Christ in our time of suffering, it'll bring glory to him. There could be a greater purpose, depending on how you handle it. Well, I don't like that, Pastor Rob. I mean, you're saying God would let us suffer just for that? That doesn't seem right. I don't know if I like that version of God. Doesn't matter. It's not going to affect the truth of who God is it? Any of you ever heard of Joni Eareckson Tada? Anybody heard of her? Paralyzed when she dove into a lake when she was, I don't know, maybe 12 or something. From like the neck down. Spent the rest of her life suffering and in pain. And guess what? Brought more glory to God than all of us put together. There was a higher purpose. And God allowed that to happen. And you know who would be the first one to tell you that? Joni Eareckson Tada. Pain with a purpose. Job's friends were going to realize that. And it's prevalent in the life of this blind man too. He endured all these years of pain and suffering to get to this moment and this encounter. And watch this purpose with the Son of God. Everything led up to this. That's saying a lot, Pastor Rob. Can you really say that? No, but Jesus just did. Why this happened? For this moment that my Father would be glorified. I didn't say it, he did. And to break the stranglehold of lies about pain and suffering that a humanistic, secular worldview has put a stranglehold on our whole culture with. So what's the message in that? Pain with a purpose? Well, not all suffering is punishment. Sometimes it's a setup for a greater revelation. God uses our struggles to showcase his glory. And that may be hard to digest, but again, it's the truth about God revealed. And the further we are away from understanding God as he really is, the harder that's going to be to accept. Just is. So instead of asking, why me? Let's ask, what is God trying to show through me? What is God trying to show me? And listen, when he does show you, for example, in his word, what you are to do, here's why the pain and suffering is coming, and here's what I want you to learn, and here's what I want you to do, then you are to act now and not wait. That's point number 2 in your notes. When you are sure, like the most basic commands in God's word, what he wants you to do, you should not wait. You should go do it right away. By the way, let's talk about that a second. Why does God desire immediate obedience when he knows that we know what he wants us to do? Why does he want us to not sit on it for a while? Well, because obedience deferred is obedience denied. Did you make that up? Yeah, it comes from a different saying. Again, I don't think it's going to stick, but it does make sense here. Obedience deferred is obedience denied. If you wait on the basic, simple things that God commands you to do, you're probably never going to do them. It's that easy. He wants you to act now and not wait. By the way, were all the conclusions of Job's friends and the disciples wrong? We didn't touch on that. No, I mean, the one about who sinned him, that's just flat out stupid. That's wrong. How about his parents? Is that possible? Sure. I've seen parents do cruel things and stupid and abusive things, and their kids suffer because of it. Is that possible? Yes. It happens. I've seen kids do things, and their parents suffer because of what they did. Sure, that's possible. In fact, I'll give you other reasons for pain and suffering. Some of you said them. See if these came out. We live in a fallen world. There's a reason right there. Flat out sin. Because there's sin, pain and suffering happen. How about the acts of others? We just said, sure. How about it's somebody else's fault? It really isn't your fault. Yeah, that happens sometimes because of what somebody else did. How about it's your fault? Yeah. How about it's God's will? Well, we're learning today sometimes that's it too. But Jesus wants to expose their conclusion. That is, when they excluded a godly purpose or even a godly purpose even being possible. He's saying, you guys went right to the default. What is that default? You guys went right to karma. That's not of me. That's not a true picture of the character of God and why there's pain and suffering in a fallen world. That comes from something else. That's an ungodly worldview on pain and suffering. So it wasn't the default of a sadistic God. It was the destiny of a salvific Jesus. Make sense? A salvific Jesus who said to the disciples, we must work the works of him who sent me while it's day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. That's why I said, act now, don't wait. Because Jesus said it. Don't wait. I'm not going to be here forever. There's things I'm going to ask you to do that have a shelf life, that have an expiration date. If you don't do them, the best time to do them will pass, and we'll be held accountable. There's an urgency to God's calling that we don't have forever to do everything he tells us to do. Aren't we experiencing this right now as a church? Mission 832, we're getting ready to launch. And you've heard me say it before, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So on getting ready for grand opening, we want everybody to be ready. When? Now. We want to start getting ready and rehearsing and doing everything because it's just a few weeks away. When that passes, what's our second chance for a grand opening? Never. You only get one. So instead of always debating what we'd have done in epic moments, you ever hear people do this? I wonder what I would have done if I was alive, when David killed Goliath. Would I have stepped forward? Would I have taken on the giant? Probably not. Probably not. How do I know? Because his own brothers didn't, who were old enough for war. The entire 100,000 soldiers in the Israelite army didn't. The king, who was the tallest man by head and shoulders of anybody in the whole region, he didn't take on Goliath. He's the most likely candidate. He could probably dunk a basketball, Saul, but he didn't take him on, right? Little shepherd boy David did. And I have a theory as to why. I think David did because he had spent his entire childhood being obedient and acting right away on the simple commands of the Lord. And he built a really strong foundation. So when it came time to do the big things, he's ready. In fact, it was pretty casual. So some of you might be thinking, I've heard people say this. I wonder if I lived in Germany in the 1940s. Would if I have stood against Hitler? Would I have participated in the Crusades? If I lived in the South and I was wealthy 200 years ago, would if I have stood up against slavery? Would I have sided with Joshua and Caleb and facing the giants and crossing the Jordan River into the promised land? Or would I have cowered with the 10 spies? Would if I have stepped in if I was a priest into the Jordan River when it was flooding and overflowing, trusting God would stop the waters? Or would I just say, stop them first, God? Would I have fought Goliath? Here's my advice if you wonder those things. Start with obeying quickly in the simple things you know to do. By the way, can I just do a spoiler alert for you? People hate spoiler alerts, but I'm going to go ahead and give you. I can answer that question. If you're wrestling with, I really want to know what I would have done. Here it comes. You ready? You guys don't seem ready. If you are not obedient in the simple things right now, you absolutely would not have done anything I just mentioned. You would have gone along. I know that hurts to hear, but I'm applying it to myself too. If you're not obeying the simple commands of the Lord, why in the world would he call you to do great things? He called David for a reason. He didn't pluck him out of obscurity. And even when he does pluck people out of obscurity, like Abraham, he built them up for like 20, 30 years. But with David, David was obeying the simple commands of the Lord, and he was ready for the big things when it came. You won't be ready if you're not acting quickly with the small things. By the way, and this is free, you can know the answer beyond a shadow of a doubt. You don't have to doubt. You don't have to go back and forth. And you can change it. Like if I just told you, sorry, here's the bad news, you wouldn't have done it. You wouldn't have done the right thing. You want to know how you can change it, and you will do the right thing? Start obeying in the simple things. Spending time in his word, getting closer to the Lord, becoming a man or a woman of prayer, etc. Building up that foundation so when he calls you to do something big like launch a church, we'll be ready to launch a great church that will glorify God. You know, Pastor Alba, got my feelings hurt a little bit when you said I absolutely wouldn't have done the right thing. I don't know. It was kind of offensive. I don't know if you realize that. Pastors shouldn't be offensive. Jesus was never offensive. Really? Do you think that? You think Jesus wasn't offensive? He was offensive all the time. All the time. Many times, here it comes, on purpose. Offensive on purpose? Sure, he was offensive on purpose right here in John 9. Really? How do you know that? Well, verses 13 and 14 tell me he was offensive on purpose. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. So Jesus heals him, and he tells them he spits in the mud, puts mud on his face, tells them to wash, which are technically works. Why does that matter? Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Jesus could have walked out of the temple on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, but he did it on the Sabbath. He'd probably seen that guy before. Why did he do it on the Sabbath? I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing. It was on purpose. In fact, I looked in the Gospels and I read that Jesus healed specifically on the Sabbath 7 times. He set out knowing it was the Sabbath and planned the whole thing. Really, that's curious, Pastor Rob. Why do you think he did that? Oh, I know why he did it. Why? To offend. He set out to offend. I get the feeling you're not with me, so let me defend my offend. I wonder how the disciples felt about this, kind of stirring up things when you don't have to. Hey, Jesus, can we deal with this guy born blind on Tuesday? Just this once. It's been a rough week. They just tried to kill us. You throwing rocks at you. Some of the rocks can hit us. We're in this, but how about Tuesday? No. Sabbath. Why? Because this worldview is so entrenched in them and so dangerous to living all out for God that if I don't wake them up and offend them, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. Yeah, but you said Jesus is like offensive sometimes. Oh, no, I said a lot of times. And let me read you something. 1 Peter 2, 6 through 8. You can read this later on your own, but it says, it stands in Scripture, this is Peter talking, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So the honor is for you who believe, but for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. Who's the cornerstone? What's he called here? The rock of offense. It's one of his names. Sometimes God offends us so that he can reveal to us we have a position or a perspective on him that is inaccurate and must change. He'll shock us right out of it. Next, so obey quickly, but obey, point number 3, even when it's odd. So Jesus moves forward with the healing of the blind man on the Sabbath in a very odd way. Most of the time when he healed blind people, he just laid hands on them and they received sight. Here he spits in the mud, he spits in the dirt, makes mud, pats it on him, and then he makes this guy who has never seen anything in his life and is still blind grope his way to the pool of Siloam, which means sin, ironically, and wash himself. How long did this take? And I'm sure he knew his way around, but still, everybody's watching while this awkward thing. He's got mud caked on his face, and he's trying to find the pools. Then he's going to watch. And we're all observing this, and there's probably a crowd at this point. The whole thing's offensive. The whole thing involves work. He's healing this blind guy on the Sabbath and making sure he does a lot and makes this guy do a lot so that nobody will miss that they're working. He's going to make this guy work. Why? To add to the offense. It's odd. Jesus' most common miracle was giving sight to the blind, but he never did it like this. But in the Bible, there are a lot of odd things. Wash 7 times in a dirty river, God commanded the prophet Elijah to have Naaman do. Not just once, 7 times. Wash in the filthy Jordan? Yeah. Interesting. Put blood on your doorposts. To all the Jewish people when they were slaves in Egypt, if you want the angel of death to pass by, to pass over. That's a weird thing. And in fact, if you aren't obedient, if you don't do this in faith, it won't pass by you. Your eldest son will die. So you better obey, even if it's odd. Be immersed underwater in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit to identify with the people of God. If you ever think about that, that's just weird. It's a weird thing to go through. It's a little bit odd. March around a city for 7 times each day of the week. And on the 7th day, Jericho, Joshua, have the people march around that city 7 times. And what do we do when we're done? Start yelling and singing and blowing your instruments. That's how you're going to fight this battle. That's just odd. It's just weird. Moses, take your marching orders from this bush over here. It's on fire and it's talking. It's God. That's odd. And many, many more. I can go on and on and on. What I'm trying to say is sometimes God's instructions don't make sense to us. But there's power in simple obedience. When we follow his lead, even in the unusual, we unlock miracles and breakthroughs in our lives. And you know what? You very seldom see God say, listen, I'm going to bless you right now. Here's everything up front. I sure hope you obey after this. No, usually he says, here's what I want you to do. And I promise I'll take care of you. Seek first the kingdom of God. Then all those things will be added to you. Here's what our world does with our worldview philosophy that's messed up. We seek first all the things we want. And we're like, God, if you're thrown in later, that's cool. It's also upside down. It's completely backwards. It's a humanistic, secular worldview that won't work for Christ followers. This is why he's got to offend and shock and get us on the right course here. Just like the disciples, just like Job's friend. Next, point number 4, stand your ground. Key verse. After the blind man, born blind, receives sight, he goes to the religious leaders and tries to explain this, and they start grilling him. They start saying, you were an eyewitness. Tell us exactly what you saw, but before all this happened. He's like, I didn't see anything. I was born blind. Why are you grilling me theologically? I don't know any of this stuff. Finally, it got down to this one saying, which I love. The one thing I know, stop grilling me. The one thing I know, I was blind. Now I see. Well, that's all you had to say, because that's pretty powerful in and of itself. They're badgering him, asking him why he's not a better eyewitness. And well, think about being an eyewitness is you need eyes. And he didn't have any. So it's ridiculous what they're doing. And then he just said, I'm going to cut to the chase. I was blind. Insert Jesus. Now I see. That's my new worldview. When God moves in your life, not everyone will believe it. But like the blind man, we must stand firm in our testimony. Okay, Pharisees, here's my new testimony. This is it. If you want to film it and use it, it's going to be 5 seconds. I was blind, now I see. Thank you, go home. Finally, point 5, see with your heart. Verse 39, for judgment, Jesus says, I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. I didn't say follow your heart. I said see with your heart. See, Jesus said this, and I'm saying, although judgment is not the reason for Jesus coming, how do I know that? John 3:17, for I had not come into the world to judge or to condemn it. After the most famous verse in the Bible, John 3:16, comes John 17. So he's not talking about that. Although judgment's not the reason for Jesus coming, it is the result of his coming. True vision isn't about what our eyes can see. It's about what our hearts perceive. And that's what he's after with the disciples. And that's what he's after with Job's friends. And that's what he's after with us. So, Job's friends and the disciples and Christ followers today, God invites us to move from surface level understanding to deeper spiritual insight. To start living on the big picture of what God's doing, including a fallen world, including other people's decisions, including things that are unfair, and yes, including pain and suffering. Because it's not about even our pain and suffering. You know, one day all the tears will be wiped away and all the pain and suffering will be gone, but that's not in this life. That's not in this life. So I'll stand firm in your testimony. If you're a Christ follower this morning, once you were blind, now you can see. Let's pray.